FLCL Progressive is a fucking travesty. Not only one of the worst sequels I've ever seen, but among the outright worst shows that I can think of, even taken on its own merits, of which there are none. Going into this show, I tried to think of it as an original piece of work which happened to share iconography with the original, but doing so proved difficult when it constantly and painfully paid lip service to its forebear while exhibiting an utter bankruptcy of understanding why the original series was what it was. You may be thinking that's a weird way to watch a sequel, pretending it's not one and all, but you have to understand that the mere conceit of creating a sequel to FLCL is so asinine and misguided that even having the idea for it was evidence that the person who did so couldn't possibly make it good. On the off chance that anyone important to the original show's creative team had come up with this on the basis of genuinely finding a good reason to return to the series when its first season is nearly old enough to vote, I might have believed there was a genuine creative spark guiding its creation. But considering fucking no one involved with the original has creative credits on this one, it's hard to imagine why this team wouldn't just have created something original if not for the fact that FLCL is a long-standing and beloved intellectual property which Production IG has the rights to. And since I've seen how they pitch their IPs after the players who made them great have left the mound, I had no reason to expect anything other than mediocrity from this sequel. What I got was much worse. An ugly, boring clusterfuck following a nonsensical playbook of canonized ideas about what the original show was. Even just the fact that this season is 6 episodes long. Like, is it somehow important to FLCL that it was precisely 6 episodes? Did they think that this would make us assume that it would be the diebuster to FLCL's Gunbuster? Let me take a step back and explore this. Back in 1988, later to be legendary Eva director Hideaki Anno helmed a 6-episode cult classic OVA called Gunbuster. 16 years later, his direct protege Kazuya Tsurumaki directed a 6-episode sequel called Diebuster, fresh off the heels of having made his debut with an awesome original idea called FLCL. Afterwards, he and Anno then fucked off to make their own studio to rebuild Evangelion for the rest of their lives. Diebuster was a great sequel precisely because it was one mostly in spirit. While set in the same universe and tackling similar themes with relatively the same cast layout, it was so far removed from the original in time and location, and featured so little reference to it beyond a few visual cues and narrative nods that you could easily take it as a standalone work. In fact, for many younger anime fans, seeing Diebuster first and loving it is what made them curious about the original. If FLCL Progressive had been my first exposure to the franchise, I doubt I would have made it through the first episode, and I certainly wouldn't have sat through all 6 of the fuckers if I wasn't already such a huge fan of the original and had a platform to complain about the sequel, considering I was clawing my eyes out by around halfway through episode 3. Now, if you couldn't tell by the last video I did on FLCL, in which I accurately summarized the entire plot in less than 3 minutes, I am something of an expert on the topic, having watched it no less than 13 times since I was 13 years old, including with director's commentary, which goes into a pretty hefty amount of depth on how all of the creative decisions were made. I would characterize the majority of it as Kazuya Tsurumaki's psychic brain blast. He incorporated imagery and plot elements which resonated with him personally, incorporated the influence of staffers whom he enjoyed working with and admired, and 3D scanned his own fucking hand into the show just so you knew his goddamn hands were literally all over it. Naoto's brother and Haruko are left-handed because he always found left-handedness mysterious and cool. Naoto can't handle spicy foods, and Haruko can because Tsurumaki can't and admires people who can. Naoto uses a flying V because Tsurumaki is friends with director Akitaro Daichi, who is a guitar collector, and so asked him what the most badass iconic guitar was so he could use it as the ultimate masculine symbol of power. Mamimi smokes a cigarette with Never Knows Best written on it because Tsurumaki saw it in a magazine once. Kanti has a TV head because he didn't want to make what would be seen as a mecha show, so the robots were mostly downscaled and deliberately weird looking. The South Park sequence is there because the team at Gainax had all been watching the show at the time. Episode 4 is weird and trippy, and 5 is explosive and awesome because these were the personal styles of the episode directors whom Tsurumaki encouraged to run wild. Sexual innuendo pervades the dialogue because it was written by Enokido Yoji, and that's just what he does, and the animators ran with it, turning Naoto's horn into a blatant dick metaphor. The Pillows performed the soundtrack because Tsurumaki was a fan of the group and wanted to match the show's stylized visuals with an energetic rock soundtrack. I could go on like this all all day. The point I'm getting at here is that Fooly Cooly was entirely the product of the people who made it doing whatever the hell they wanted in this playground of animation. Gainax wanted to experiment with new visual styles, and they concocted animation techniques so advanced as to never have been duplicated since. When you really stop to think about what's going on in this moving manga sequence, it's absolutely insane, and Tsurumaki says that they just about melted through a workstation trying to render the goddamn thing on Y2K computer technology. And this, more than anything, is the point of Fooly Cooly. Yes, the show has resonant themes about growing up and understanding what it really means to be mature, but these themes are as common as light love and red valleys of blood. The only reason they hit so hard in the context of this show is that the team was able to represent them with such iconic imagery and gripping narrative prowess. If you think Fooly Cooly was just a kooky, random spaz fest, then I would first encourage you to watch my aforementioned video and then to watch the show again, because every single second of it makes perfect sense once you understand what's actually going on. Insert waxing here about how it's a perfect metaphor for childhood to not know how to parse the lies and truth of the adult world surrounding you, and how it's the kind of thing that suddenly seems all too obvious in hindsight, and how the show's manipulation of your expectations and understanding parallels what Haruko is doing to Naota, yada yada, we get it. People who actually care about the original show have been analyzing all this depth out of it for nearly 2 goddamn decades, but somehow the team behind Progressive didn't get the memo. Let me be perfectly clear about this. Fooly Cooly wasn't special because it occasionally dove into unique art styles. It was special because even outside of those, every single image in the entire show is perfectly cinematically constructed to convey an emotion. It isn't special because the characters say weird, funny stuff. It's special because every single line of dialogue contributes to our understanding of them in some kind of meaningful fashion, whether the purpose of what they're saying is immediately evident or not. It isn't cool because the Pillow's music is dope as hell, though that's also true. It's because the scenes are timed around the music, with emotional crescendos being met simultaneously in the audio and visuals at a constant clip. In short, Fooly Cooly is special because it manages to be the totally fetishistic personal art project of an auteur director and his team of visionaries, while also being structurally perfect. Incidentally, the Pillows are a band who is largely considered to have gone downhill over the past 18 years, but they were brought back for the new show anyways to perform similar sounding tunes over lifeless panning shots, and even to re-record some of the original songs and make them sound worse. Ouch. The first mistake of Fooly Cooly's first sequel is how it focuses so much on plot elements of the original which literally no one gave a fuck about and most people barely even understood because they didn't fucking matter. No one is going to be excited that fucking Atomisk and Medical Mechanica are back because they were basically just metaphors for power and control in the first place. Neither had shit to do with the central narrative of the series, which is also true in the sequel, so why not create something new? Especially if you were going to go and misinterpret the original in an attempt at over-explaining these aspects. First of all, why are Eno fields now exclusively open by way of sexual excitement? And who thought a fucking Eno scouter was a good idea? Why would Haruko need to hit random people on the head with their bass guitar if there was a way to just scan someone's Eno potential? In the original show, Eno fields were open when someone had a major emotional reaction of any kind, not just sexually. Moreover, why in the fuck do the characters describe their sexual overstimulation as being about to overflow? In the original, Mamimi explained to Naota that she had to perform skinship with him so that she wouldn't overflow, and then says that she is in fact overflowing when she collapses in anxiety after finding out that Naota's brother has a new girlfriend in America. So it's pretty obvious that this is just how Mamimi describes herself having a panic attack, and considering that she doesn't even fucking have an open NO channel, this weird bastardization of what it means to overflow is mind-numbing. Secondly, why in the fuck is Haruko presented as actually being in love with Atomisk? Did this cherry fuckboy writer actually make the same mistake as Amurao, or did he learn about the plot by reading the inaccurate Wikipedia description? Let's be clear, in the original show, Amurao imagines Atomisk as this incredibly badass portrait of masculinity whom Haruko must be in love with because he had previously been used and dusted by Haruko in the past and has fabricated his own narrative about why she left him on a foundation of his insecurity over being a lacking fucking sexual partner. In the end, it turns out that Adamisk is actually a fucking giant energy bird, and Haruko just wants to devour him and gain his powers for herself. In the sequel, not only is Haruko implied to be literally in love with the giant energy bird, but also to literally devour people as a means of gaining their powers. This is straight retarded. I gotta hand it to Production IG though, they certainly tried not to make the insanely obvious parallels between every single member of the original cast and their corresponding character in the sequel too overbearing, but if that's not the most backhanded compliment I've ever given, then I don't know what is. Right around the part where Kanti's head was on the body of a robot dog and being fed a box of scrap parts so that he could grow to full size, I wanted to kill myself. If it seems like I'm focusing an awful lot on comparison to the first season for someone who tried to watch this show as a totally original product, it's only because nothing actually fucking happens in the series when it isn't paying homage to the original. Its plot and setting are nonsensical, its visuals are bland and uninviting, its characters have no chemistry whatsoever and barely comprehensible motivations, and it somehow finds a way to beat you over the head with its thematic ideas while managing to say nothing whatsoever of substance. Where do I even fucking begin? The conceit of the original series was that it took place in what Naota perceived as a small, boring city where nothing happens, which he only perceives this way because he's a kid who thinks that life is supposed to be bigger and more exciting than this. Stuff is very clearly happening in Mabase. A new industry has just arrived, creating a load of jobs, political sex scandals are the talk of the town, there's daily arson attacks. It's about as exciting as any place you could find yourself living, which is to say not at all. While many things are presented in weird and crazy art styles, the only unrealistic things which actually happen are centered around Haruko and Medical Mechanica, and it's because of that solid ground of realism in the setting, and how well that realism is presented, that the show can rapidly come back down to earth to deliver on hard-hitting emotional moments, like Naota watching Mamimi fish for her shoes in the river and slowly realizing that she's being bullied in school, or Ninamori explaining how she reunited her parents by bearing her soul in a plea to stick together for her sake before vaulting a bar in gym class. At first, FLCL Progressive seems to be shooting for a similar vibe, setting itself in the generic Japanese town of anime du jour, but then it soars careening off the rails in episode 2 when the guy is revealed to live in a third world shanty town where he works as a literal slave, pulling junk cars by rope while a guy whips him. At this point, my brain twisted into a pretzel trying to figure out if this was meant to be literal or metaphorical, and any ability to take the setting seriously went entirely out the window. As it progressed, the magical technologies and alien superpowers got more over the top and absent of any consistent internal logic, and yet somehow every single episode contained a bombastic action scene with zero dramatic stakes or any sense of who's winning or why. This is just basic screenwriting ineptitude. Believe it or not, there was one scene in the show that almost got me excited about the possibility of what was to come. It was the very start of episode 2, in which the main girl has a crazy ass dream about being eaten by zombies, and it's strongly implied that she's really into Guro and sexually excited by the idea of being eaten. Being a member of a Guro household myself, I would have loved to see a show exploring what odd combinations of psychological trauma and warped perspective might lead to the manifestation of this fetish, but from that point forward, the number of words spared on the subject is precisely 0. In fact, it would seem that this character attribute only mattered insofar as when the girl sees the boy being brutalized, it suddenly activates her attraction to him. But from that point forward, her interest in him is basically just proportional to how regularly chivalrous he is, so I guess it didn't really matter much in the first place. The guy's motivations are easy enough to understand because the series goes out of its way to paint him as the most generic idea of a teenaged boy imaginable. He might as well be a living penis. He wants to fuck girls, but then he arbitrarily falls in love with this one, so he decides to protect her against the other one. That's his story. As for the girl, she doesn't really relate to anyone and finds their sexuality boring and rote, so she tries to avoid conversation. But then she arbitrarily falls in love with the main guy anyways, and then all of a sudden, in the last couple episodes, there's all this exposition dumped about her strained relationship with her mother, who explains that ever since her husband left, she's just been waiting for him to come back so that she could be a mother again. And at this point, I realized I had no idea what the fuck this show was actually supposed to be about. Nothing was ever communicated to us about her mother underperforming in her motherhood. At worst, she seemed like an obnoxious comic relief character, and her daughter just seemed disaffected at everything in general, up until the moment that we learned there's some specific trauma with her family at the tail end of episode 5. And in case you're wondering if, like the original, this is a show that makes more sense on the rewatch, watch? No, it's pretty fucking direct about what's going on every single step of the way, to the point that it regularly repeats itself. Haruko, who's now a fake high school teacher, is constantly going on these rants about how her students are a bunch of millennial drones who need to activate themselves and rebel against the system or something, and none of this has anything to do with the character's attitudes or motivations until the final battles between Haruko and the main girl, whereupon it's all of a sudden about lifting yourself up by your bootstraps and taking what you want with your own hands, and what the fuck does this have to do with anything? May I remind you that half an episode of this show was spent at the beach. There's this weird blue-haired girl who pretends to be a shitty moe caricature for money, and then I guess she turns out to be some kind of chosen one who can stop Medical Mechanica, and there's all these fucking pumpkins, and look, there's one part in the climax where a character literally exclaims that all of this is for no reason at all, and near as I can tell, that's exactly the case. The show is full of crazy, zany, wacky hijinks and edgy sexual innuendo and coming-of-age themes because that's what this hack writer understood of the original Fooly Cooly. Fooly Cooly Progressive occasionally transforms into some cool and potentially interesting art styles, but since there's nothing actually happening in the show in the first place, most of them end up being a boring waste, and left me wishing that a better show had been given the opportunity to have these artists contribute something meaningful. Episode 5 has a completely different drawing style for no fucking reason, and the bulk of the artwork and animation is just as stiff and lifeless as the rest of the goddamn show. Why bother? If there's any one scene which best encapsulates Fooly Cooly Progressive, it's the absolutely shameful attempt at creating another moving manga sequence. You remember that technological marvel of expertly timed animation madness which was so memorable they felt they had to do it again, even though the first time it had been so difficult that they'd sworn to never attempt it again? In Fooly Cooly Progressive, there is no animation. The entire sequence is made up of fades and pans, which I could literally have edited myself in Sony Vegas in a day or two. Fucking best guy ever edited a better, more effectively emotional moving manga sequence in a goddamn YouTube video. This is the most pathetic thing I've ever seen. Fooly Cooly Progressive is a transparent and horribly misguided cash grab. It exists for the same reason Psycho Pass 2 and Ghost in the Shell Arise and Blood Sea and Be the Beginning exist, as described in my How They Marketed video. Because original and beloved IPs are the most powerful commodity in the anime industry, and Production IG wanted to reinvigorate this one that Gainax obviously wasn't doing anything with since it barely exists anymore, which isn't apparently stopping them from dragging Gunbuster to the same fate with the announcement of a third season. It doesn't matter if it makes no fucking sense and is a terrible idea, it'll make back its money on nostalgia, generate hype on brand recognition, and get defended by people who never understood the original in the first place and can't tell the difference. And even if everyone else fucking hates it, the worst that can come from it is that they won't have enough goodwill left over to entreat the audience to a fourth fuck-off season in the future, i.e. they'll get away with murder. The only consequence is that now fans of the series will have to follow up every proclamation of love for it with a denouncement and insistence on decanonization of the sequels. Meanwhile, everyone will watch the next dogshit Production IG sequel anyways because they are completely right to do this since all anyone gives a shit about is brand recognition. Fuck the world, fuck them all. Anyways, this stupid ass shitty anime season is almost over now, so maybe I'll get to talk about something I like sometime soon. In the meantime, if you're into video games, go check out my new channel, I Am Games, where my friends and I do live streams and then review the games we just live streamed. Also support me on Patreon if you like to hear me say fuck 30 times in 20 minutes. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.